I remember the cold snap in the air that morning. Seattle always has that stubborn damp chill just before Thanksgiving. I had just finished wrapping up an installation job in Ballard, fingers stiff from the wind, boots covered in the usual layer of dust and grime. I climbed into my work van, still thinking about which wine would pair best with turkey and truffle oil stuffing. It was supposed to be a nice evening, Celeste, and I had talked about it the week before. Her friends were hosting a high-rise dinner, one of those fancy, curated events with minimalist decor, music from vinyl, and food that's more art than meal. So I called her. Just a quick check-in. I figured she'd be mid-prep or deciding which heels to wear. She picked up, sounding a bit distracted. I smiled anyway and asked, "Hey, just wondering, do you want me to bring a red or white?" There was this pause. Too long for comfort. Then came the voice I had heard 1,000 times, but now it felt like a stranger borrowing her tone. "Actually, maybe don't come." I blinked. I thought maybe I misheard her. "What do you mean?" "It's kind of exclusive," she said, her words soft but firm. "Mason and his guest will be there." That name. Mason. I stared through the windshield as the wind made the pine trees dance outside. Mason, the ex she swore was ancient history. The one whose name she used to say with an eye roll. "Mason's nothing compared to you," she'd once said. But now, here I was, being uninvited from my own wife's dinner plans because he would be there. Because it was exclusive. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "You're serious?" She gave a little breathless laugh, like she was trying to make it sound casual. "It's just easier this way." "Easier? For who?" "I'll talk to you later," she said, and the line went dead. I just sat there for a while, phone in hand, engine running, but not really hearing anything. It wasn't just the disinvitation. It was what it said without words. I was no longer part of her world. I drove home in silence. Every light felt longer than usual. Every turn sharper. The city was already lit up with early holiday decorations, twinkling lights hanging between buildings, store windows boasting "Grateful" and "Gather" in bold lettering. But inside me, nothing felt festive. Just cold. Our apartment was quiet when I walked in. She wasn't home yet. Probably out getting her nails done or finalizing place settings for the event I was no longer welcome at. I took off my boots, sat at the edge of the couch, and just stared at the floor. Not even the news or music playing in the background could distract me. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. "Maybe don't come." It echoed like a hammer against glass. It's strange. You can spend years building something. A relationship, a home, a life. You think it's solid. You think your foundation, though not flashy, is enough. But sometimes, someone else decides they want glitter instead of grit. And they'll tear down everything just to shine for a moment. I walked into the bathroom, washed my hands slowly, the water running hot over calloused fingers. I looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection stared back, tired eyes, flannel shirt, skin weathered from job sites and ladder climbs. And for the first time in a long time, I saw what she saw. Not the man who had kept the lights on in her life. Just the guy in work boots. I opened the closet where her dresses hung like soft flags of a different world. Silks, satins, labels I couldn't pronounce. I had paid for most of them. Birthday surprises. Little victories. She used to light up when she wore them. But somewhere along the way, that light stopped being for me. I walked past our wedding photo in the hallway. She wore a simple white dress. No designer name. Just elegance. And me? Same boots, different suit. What changed? Maybe I had been blind. Maybe I had convinced myself love was enough. That effort, consistency, showing up, those things mattered more than status or shine. But now I was starting to realize. I had been erased. Slowly, elegantly, quietly pushed out of the frame so she could paint a prettier one. The next day, I stayed home from work. Not out of sadness. Not out of defeat. I just needed to sit with the truth. I needed to feel the full weight of it without numbing it. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the morning fog lift off the skyline. In that fog, I could almost see my old self, running errands for her, listening to her talk about Paris, holding her hand when visa documents got delayed, wiring money every semester like clockwork. I thought I was building something with her. But it turns out, I was just scaffolding. Temporary. Replaceable. When night came, and the penthouse lights flickered to life downtown, I didn't try to call her. I didn't ask how the party was. I didn't wonder who she sat next to or what joke Mason probably told. I just poured myself a drink, sat at the edge of our couch again, and started making peace with one fact. The woman I married was no longer the woman who came home to me. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the man she deserved. I was the man she used. And I was done being used. It was almost midnight when I saw the post. I had just finished sorting out invoices for a new apartment complex wiring job. My crew was expanding, and we had more business than ever. But none of that mattered in that moment, because on my screen, right in the middle of my feed, was her. Celeste. She stood at the center of a crowd, champagne in hand, laughing in that perfectly posed way she practiced in front of mirrors. The caption read, "A night with the people who inspire me most, Dizzy Sparkles." No tag, no mention of me, no ring on her finger. But Mason? He was there, right beside her. Same smug grin. Same overly tailored suit that made him look like he stepped off a fashion runway. She wore heels I hadn't seen before, probably new. Designer. I zoomed in on the photo. She had her hand on his chest. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. She had erased me completely. No trace. No hint that she was married. It was like I'd been edited out of her life carefully, deliberately. And then came the message that flipped something inside me like a switch. Tasha. Her old friend from college. The one who always stayed neutral. The one I thought barely paid attention to our lives. I didn't even know we followed each other on Instagram. But there it was, sitting in my inbox like a bomb waiting to explode. "You deserve better. Celeste told people you're just her landlord. She says it's cleaner that way." I read the message 3 times. My pulse was thudding in my ears. Landlord? I laughed, but it wasn't the kind that came from amusement. It was the bitter kind, dry and hollow. I looked around our apartment, the one I had paid the down payment for, renovated myself, rewired and repainted. I had even carved her name into the wooden beam behind the kitchen wall before we closed it up, thinking it was some sweet gesture she'd love if we ever remodeled again. She never even noticed. Landlord. The word made my stomach turn. Not husband. Not partner. Not even a roommate. Just the guy who pays for everything. I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder where I kept our shared finances. There were receipts from her school, L'Académie de Couture Internationale in Paris. Fancy name. Even fancier price tag. I had paid for every single semester. Every travel expense. Every supply kit and project fund. All because she had a dream. All because I believed in her when no one else did. She wanted Paris. I gave her Paris. $80,000. $80,000. That number hit me like a hammer. That wasn't just money. That was years of skipped vacations, skipped upgrades to my business truck, postponed dreams of my own. That was my investment in her. In us. In a future I thought we were building together. And while I was wiring tuition, she was sipping champagne next to her ex, telling people I was her landlord. I stared at the folder for a long time. And then I opened her Instagram again. Post after post, her in art galleries, rooftop parties, design studios. Always alone or with Mason or with her Paris friends. Not a single one with me. Not even a birthday picture. I had taken her to Vancouver last year. Paid for the hotel, the spa, the dinner at that revolving rooftop restaurant. And she posted a view of the skyline captioned, "Solo Soul Reset Milky Way." Solo. That was the word she used to describe a weekend I planned. The more I scrolled, the more the truth pressed against my chest like a weight. She had built a fantasy life online, a version of herself that didn't include me because I didn't fit. My boots weren't shiny enough. My hands too rough. My world too blue-collar for the gold-tinted life she craved. I had always known there was a gap between our worlds. But love was supposed to bridge it. Now I realized. She had used me as a stepping stone, a funding source, a placeholder until she was standing next to someone she thought was worthy of her new image. Mason. God, how many times had she laughed at him before? Said he was shallow, a narcissist, obsessed with image. She used to say she loved that I was grounded, real. Now she was standing next to him like a trophy wife in training. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the dining table, staring at a glass of water that I never drank, replaying every moment of the past 2 years. Every time she called from Paris saying she missed me. Every FaceTime where she said, "I wish you were here." Every time I wired more money to cover another fee or flight or fashion show. She said it was all for the dream. Our dream. Turns out, it was her fantasy. I was just financing it. At some point, I stood up and walked to the closet. Her stuff was neatly arranged, scarves from Montmartre, shoes she claimed were investment pieces. I ran my hand along the edge of her coat. I used to love the smell of her perfume on that collar. Now it just made me nauseous. There's a moment when betrayal settles in your bones, not just in your mind. When it becomes physical, you can feel it in your gut, in your spine. Like your body is bracing itself for a future it didn't see coming. That night, I crossed that line. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. I looked at our framed photo on the mantle, our wedding day. She looked beautiful, timeless. I looked proud, hopeful. I picked up the frame. I stared at it for a long time, and then I turned it around and placed it face down. I didn't break it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I knew then, things were about to change. Quietly, deliberately. She had erased me to impress the world. Now it was my turn to erase something too. But not out of spite. Out of survival. Out of self-respect. And maybe, just maybe, out of justice. The sun barely crept over the skyline the next morning when I opened my laptop. I didn't bother with coffee. I didn't turn on music. There was no routine to follow, just one purpose. I sat down, opened the bookmarked tuition portal for L'Académie de Couture Internationale, and stared at the number in bold letters on the screen. $18,270 due. That was for the spring semester. One more installment in a long list of payments I had covered for her, so she could chase her design dreams across the ocean. I remembered how excited she was the day her acceptance letter arrived. She jumped into my arms like a little kid, kissing me all over the face, whispering, "You believed in me when no one else did." And I did. I truly did. I believed in her talent, in her vision. I thought we were building something together, an empire of grit and creativity. I thought that one day, we'd look back at all the sacrifices and laugh, sitting on a balcony somewhere in Paris, drinking coffee we didn't have to ration. Now, all I could see was a lie dressed in couture. I hovered my mouse over the payment method tab. Her tuition account was linked to my business checking because mine was the only steady income. She hadn't worked a full-time job since enrolling. That had never been a problem. Not until I realized I was paying for someone to build a life that didn't include me. My cursor slid to the option, Remove Payment Method. I paused. My hand didn't tremble. My chest didn't ache. There was a time I would have struggled with this moment, second-guessed myself, told myself it was petty or cruel. But now, it felt necessary, like sealing a wound before it bled out. I clicked. A quiet pop-up asked me to confirm. "Are you sure you want to remove this payment method?" "Yes." Click. Just like that, it was done. No alarm bells. No confetti. No dramatic music playing in the background. But inside me, it was thunder. It was the sound of the first brick being pulled from the fantasy house she had built on my back. And I wasn't done. I logged into my bank account next and reviewed the automatic transfers. Her apartment rent in Paris, her cell phone bill, her art supply subscription, her Uber credit top-ups. All small pieces. All things I had let slide because I told myself she needs to focus on her studies. I've got this. But now I saw it for what it was. She had built her dream on borrowed time and blind loyalty. Mine. So I began the quiet cancel. I paused every recurring payment. I changed the passwords to the joint backup fund she hadn't touched in a while but would have pulled from in a heartbeat. I didn't tell her. I didn't send a message or leave a note. I wanted the silence to speak for me. By mid-morning, I stood up, stretched my back, and took a long breath. There was no satisfaction yet. Just clarity. A stillness I hadn't felt in years. She had chosen her world. Mason. Her image. Her curated life. And now I was choosing mine. I walked out onto the balcony and looked out at the city. Even in its noise and chaos, Seattle had a way of making you feel grounded. Maybe it was the grit in the air. Or maybe it was the fact that nothing came easy here. People built things with their hands. They worked through storms. They earned every inch. That was the life I came from. That was the life I'd started to be ashamed of, because she made me feel like it wasn't enough. But the truth is, it was more than enough. It was honest. Solid. And now, it was mine again. Around noon, I drove to the warehouse where my crew was working on a rewiring project for a tech startup. My foreman, Derek, gave me a nod as I walked in. He didn't know what was happening in my personal life. No one did. But I was there, and I was steady, and that's all they needed from me. I spent the afternoon buried in switchboard schematics, organizing fuse panels, hands busy while my mind processed everything else. At some point, my phone buzzed. A call from Paris. I didn't answer. Then another. Then her name popped up again, followed by a text. "Hey babe. Something's wrong with the tuition portal. Can you check?" I stared at the message for a full minute before locking the screen and slipping the phone back into my pocket. No response. Not yet. This wasn't about playing games. I wasn't doing this to hurt her. I was doing this to protect myself from further humiliation. She'd had every chance to include me, to honor me, to speak my name with pride instead of washing it away with vague captions and pretty lies. That evening, I sat in the garage, the one I'd converted into a mini workspace. I flipped open an old sketchbook where I used to scribble ideas for expansion, new business services, potential side hustles, community outreach plans. I'd put it aside because most of our income had been going to her schooling. But now, the future felt wide open again. The money I saved from her canceled tuition alone could buy a second work van, hire an apprentice, maybe even open a new office in Tacoma. She had erased me to impress strangers. Now I was making room for myself. I stayed in the garage until well past midnight, scribbling notes and planning quietly. No rants, no texts, no social media posts, just vision, just fire. The kind of fire that can't be seen until everything fake burns away. The next morning, I woke up to more missed calls. Her number, her mom's, one from an unknown Paris number. Still, I said nothing. I was done explaining myself to people who never cared to understand me in the first place. I had been their safety net, the dependable background character in their story of glamour. Now they'd have to write their next chapter without me. And as for me, I was just getting started. By noon the next day, the silence broke. Not gently, not gradually. It shattered. My phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. Then it rang again. Then again. Then a voicemail. I sat in the front seat of my work van, parked near the edge of a downtown job site. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. I stared at the little notification bubble with a kind of calm I didn't recognize in myself. I pressed play. Caleb, her voice crackled, high-pitched with urgency. The school says the payment account is gone. What's going on? Did something happen with your card? Please call me. I need to fix this before they put a hold on my enrollment. I deleted the voicemail and set the phone down on the dashboard. A minute later, it rang again. Then came the text. I'm going to lose my visa, Caleb. You can't be serious. Call me back. My hands stayed steady. My breathing didn't falter. I felt nothing. And that's what scared me most. The anger had passed. The sadness too. Now, all that was left was a kind of stillness. A space where love used to be. A quiet knowing that I was finally done. I got out of the van, grabbed my gear, and headed back into the building. The crew was rewiring a loft for a marketing firm that wanted exposed piping and industrial fixtures. It was the kind of work I loved. Messy, precise, rewarding. I threw myself into it, letting the hum of drills and metal on metal fill the silence where her voice had once lived in my mind. But she didn't stop. By 3 p.m., my phone had 34 missed calls and 11 voicemails. I played the last one as I locked up the site. This isn't fair. You can't just pull the rug out from under me like this. I've worked so hard. You're punishing me over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That's what she called it. Her lying to her friends, calling me her landlord, scrubbing me out of her public life like I was some stain she had to keep hidden. Apparently, that was just a little mix-up. A hiccup. A lapse in judgment. She still hadn't apologized. Not once. No, this was panic, not regret. And it wasn't just coming from her. That night, as I sat at my dining table eating leftover chili, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was her mother, Marcia, the woman who once told me I was too rough around the edges for her daughter. The one who used to smile politely at family dinners but never once asked me about my job. She didn't care what I built, just how it looked next to her daughter's curated ambitions. Her voicemail came in calm, syrupy, like a lullaby. Caleb, sweetheart. I know there's been some tension lately, but Celeste is under a lot of pressure, you understand? These things, these little misunderstandings, they happen in marriages. Don't throw away something beautiful over a hiccup. Beautiful? I looked around the apartment. Half the furniture had been chosen by me. The framed blueprint on the wall? My first independent contract. The toolbox by the front door? Mine. The insulation beneath the floorboards? I had laid it down myself. Everything around me had my name stamped into it in some invisible way. And yet, in her eyes, I was invisible. Her voice echoed again. You're punishing her, Caleb. And that's not who you are. Funny how No one said I was too kind when I sold my motorcycle to pay for her first plane ticket to Paris. No one called me generous when I stayed up late translating legal documents for her visa forms. But now that I had quietly stopped, now they remembered my heart. The next day, the calls kept coming. Celeste, her mother, her friends. Even her aunt left a teary voicemail about how dreams die when husbands give up. I didn't give up. I gave everything I had. And she gave me a role in her story that wasn't even listed in the credits. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror, shaving. Not for anyone else. Just to feel fresh. Sharp. Reclaimed. My phone lit up again. This time, it was a text from her. You can't just shut me out like this. I'm your wife. 3 seconds passed. Another message followed. This isn't who you are. I stared at those words, fingers hovering over the screen. No, this is exactly who I am now. The version of me that finally realized I wasn't being a husband. I was being a sponsor. An investor in someone else's curated illusion. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My chest felt lighter. My eyes clearer. The kind of clarity you get when you step into sunlight after years of standing in someone else's shadow. The next morning, I left my phone on silent. Instead, I called my supplier and finalized the purchase for a new service van. I'd been holding off for a year. Money always needed elsewhere. Not anymore. By the afternoon, the first payment went through. I stared at the receipt in my inbox. Paid in full. I didn't say a word. Just leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and breathed. She could scream. She could plead. She could loop her family into it and try to guilt me back into place. But I had already left that place. And I wasn't going back. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about money anymore. It was about respect. And I wasn't going to keep asking for it. I was just going to move where it already existed. Even if that meant starting over alone. Even if that meant erasing the version of myself who stayed quiet for the sake of peace. Because sometimes, peace means walking away from the noise. Even when the noise sounds like the voice you used to love. A week passed. 7 full days of silence on my part, and chaos on hers. It started with a voicemail from Celeste that was so sugary, I nearly laughed. She used that tone I hadn't heard since our early days, soft, flirty, full of breathy pauses meant to disarm me. Hey, babe, just thinking about you. Wondering if you'd want to do dinner this weekend? Just us. We need to talk. I miss you. She never used to call me babe. That word belonged to someone else, someone she could mold, flatter, control. Not me. Not anymore. I didn't reply. An hour later, she followed up with a voice note. There was a different edge to it, desperation hiding behind a thin smile. I could almost hear her pacing the hardwood floors of her Paris flat, trying to sound casual. I found this little bistro down the street. You'd love it. Rustic. They even have this old lighting fixture like the ones you install, with the exposed Edison bulbs, and her voice faltered for half a second. I know I messed up, okay? But let's not throw away everything over some confusion. Confusion. There was that word again. Apparently, calling your husband a landlord and parading your ex around while scrubbing me from your life online was just a misunderstanding. A little fog in the air. Nothing permanent. But then, the fog started clearing. Tasha messaged me again. That woman had no idea how much I appreciated her small, quiet bravery. She didn't have to say anything. But she did. Her message said, Mason found out you were paying for her school. He thought she came from a wealthy family. She never told him you existed. He left. I read it twice. Sat down. Read it again. It landed differently than I expected. Not with joy. Not with a petty thrill. Just confirmation. That the fantasy world Celeste had built on borrowed love and silent sacrifice was finally caving in. Tasha added. He called her a liar in front of everyone. She cried. She begged. Then he left her at the gallery event. Celeste had erased me to build a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't survive the truth. Especially not when the glass slipper is paid for by someone else's sweat. I stood by the window that evening, watching the rain blur the city lights. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, older, maybe, but not weaker. I felt a strange mix of grief and calm, like I had buried something, and now I could finally breathe in the space it left behind. Later that night, I heard the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole. Empty hallway. Then I saw it, a small envelope tucked under the mat. My name written on the front. Her handwriting. I picked it up, brought it inside, opened it without ceremony. Inside. A letter. Not typed. Not copied from a notes app. Handwritten. Caleb. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I can't blame you. I've made choices that I thought would elevate me, but they only exposed how empty I really feel without you. I pretended to be someone I wasn't to keep up with people who didn't care about me. And in doing that, I pushed away the one person who always stood by me. Asterisk. I never told Mason about you because I didn't want him to see where I came from. I told myself I was protecting our privacy. But the truth is, I was ashamed. Not of you, but of how small I felt beside people who wore wealth like armor. I let them define my worth. I let them convince me you weren't enough. But now I see it clearly. You were more than enough. You were the only real thing in my life. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you know. I miss you. No signature. No plea. Just silence on the page. I set the letter down and sat there for a long while. She had finally admitted it. But it was too late. Apologies don't restore erased names. And guilt doesn't repair dignity. The next morning, I opened my workshop early. My crew had grown used to me being quiet lately, but now they noticed something different. Stillness replaced by energy. Focus. I gave out assignments, picked up a clipboard, and led the morning walkthrough myself. Around lunch, I stepped outside for some air. That's when my phone buzzed again, Celeste, this time with a text. I told my mother I'm coming home for winter break. I was hoping you and I could talk, maybe meet for coffee. I stared at the message. I thought about the cafe we used to visit every Sunday. The one with chipped mugs and that old man who played violin near the window. We used to laugh there. We used to plan. That was before everything turned into appearances. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked back inside and checked the whiteboard where I listed potential business expansions. I crossed off wait and see and wrote in bold letters. Launch apprenticeship program, January. Her fairy tale had collapsed. But from where I stood, the real story was just beginning. A story where I didn't have to shrink to fit anyone's expectations. A life where my hands, calloused, sure, but steady, could finally build for myself again. I wasn't a footnote in someone else's script. I was the author now, and my name would no longer be erased. It was a Monday morning, the sky still gray and sleepy when I pulled up to the site. We were rewiring a century-old brownstone being renovated into creative lofts, heavy beams, brittle drywall, stubborn junctions. My kind of project. I liked the work that made you earn it. The kind that didn't just require hands, but memory, knowing what was behind the walls, understanding how things used to be built before people started cutting corners for shine. I was halfway through mapping the circuit plan with my crew when I heard it. Heels. Sharp, impatient, echoing across the unfinished floor like a drumbeat of trouble. I looked up, and there she was. Celeste. Hair pulled into a high bun like she used to wear it for job interviews, lips painted like she had something to prove, heels far too delicate for a construction site. Her eyes, red, rimmed, unblinking. For a moment, no one moved. The guys paused mid-task. Derek froze with a coil of wire in his hand. Even the portable radio stopped between songs, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She spotted me and stormed straight through the dust, her shoes clicking against the concrete like hammers. "You can't do this to me," she shouted, her voice sharp and raw. "You're ruining my future." I stayed still, calm, hands resting on my tool belt, clipboard at my side. I could feel the eyes of my team, the tension in the air thick as static. "I have one semester left," she went on, tears starting to well. "Just one. You've paid for everything else." "Why stop now?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't about tuition anymore. It wasn't even about the money. It was about every moment I had stood by her when no one else would. Every time I had believed her when she said she needed just a little more time, a little more space, a little more faith. And every time she looked the other way while I faded into the background of her life. She stepped closer, eyes darting around the crew, aware now that this wasn't private. That her stage had an audience. I didn't mean for things to get like this, okay? I was trying to make something of myself. I thought if I could just fit in with them, if I could just finish this program, I'd be someone people respected. And who was I to you? I asked finally. My voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It was steady, deliberate, low like thunder just before a storm. She blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I took a step forward, stopping a few feet from her. "You erased me to impress strangers," I said. "You told people I was your landlord. You stood next to your ex like I never existed. You rewrote the story we built together, and you did it without flinching." A flicker of guilt passed across her face. Then she tried again, softer now. "I was ashamed of myself, Caleb. Not of you. I was scared I wasn't enough on my own. I didn't want to be the girl with the working-class husband while everyone else was. Fake," I finished for her. "You didn't want real. You wanted shiny, glossy, edited." She looked away. I let the silence stretch for a second longer before I spoke again, this time more to myself than anyone else. I was proud of you, even when you weren't proud of me. She looked up, eyes wide. I stayed up wiring apartments to send you overseas. I missed birthdays, worked overtime, ate ramen so you could eat at French cafes and post pretty quotes under them. And all I ever asked for was a little space beside you, a little respect, a little truth. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. And now, she whispered. What now? I looked around the space, at my crew, at the exposed beams, at the bare bones of something being rebuilt. I'm just following your lead, I said. You erased me. I'm erasing what I gave you. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, maybe even to fight. But Derek stepped forward then, gently but firmly. Ma'am, this is an active job site. You'll need to leave. She stared at me one last time. No more words. Then she turned and walked out, her heels tapping out a slow retreat across the concrete. Her shoulders pulled back, but just barely. When the door closed behind her, the room stayed quiet. Derek looked at me. The others waited, unsure. Back to work, I said simply. And just like that, the rhythm resumed. Drills whirred, pipes clanked, and the real world spun back into motion. But something had changed. Not just in her, in me. That night, I went back home and sat in the garage, flipping through old receipts, sketch pads, contractor proposals. I used to keep it all organized in binders labeled with hopeful words. Future home, business growth, Paris 2025. I had built a life with her in mind. Every plan had her name penciled somewhere in the corner, like an anchor I thought would hold. Now, I flipped to a fresh page. No more corners. No more placeholders. Just me. In the blank space of a life I could build without apology. She had made her choices. So had I. And if this was what erasing looked like, then it wasn't loss. It was clarity. It was peace. It was the end of pretending. And the beginning of becoming. The days that followed her visit to the site came with a wave of calls. One after the other. I stopped counting after the third day. Her number, her mother's, even an old friend of hers I hadn't spoken to since our wedding. All of them lighting up my phone like a siren I had long since decided to ignore. They didn't want to understand. They only wanted to restore what looked good from the outside. As if pretending everything was fine would magically wipe away the betrayal. The first call I picked up wasn't from her. It was her little cousin, Tori. 17. Sweet kid. Used to call me Uncle Caleb when we'd visit for holidays. She sounded nervous, unsure if she should even be calling. Hi, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About what's happening, she said, voice shaky, like she'd snuck the call behind her mom's back. Everyone's talking about it. Celeste is crying all the time. Nana's worried. Aunt Marcia's been calling everyone, trying to fix it. She even said she might come to Seattle. That made me laugh, quietly. Marcia, coming to Seattle, meant one thing, damage control. Not for my sake, of course, but to salvage her daughter's image. Thank you for calling, Tori, I said, keeping my tone calm. But this isn't something that needs fixing. Not by anyone else, anyway. She said you're being cold, Tori blurted. That you just flipped. Flipped? That word sat heavy in my chest. No, I said after a pause. I didn't flip. I woke up. Tori was quiet for a second. Then she sighed and said, I think you're the only real one in the whole family. For what it's worth. And just like that, the call ended, and I was alone again. Not lonely. Just alone. That was something I was learning how to embrace. The next few days brought what I started calling the guilt parade. First came the aunt, Celeste's mom's older sister, Anita. She left me a voice note trying to appeal to my good nature. I listened to it while fixing a fuse box outside a bakery. She's sorry, Caleb. She's not perfect, but no one is. You two have history. That should count for something. You're her husband. What happened to loyalty? Loyalty. The word pulsed in my ears. Heavy. Loaded. I had been loyal when she left for school, promising she'd call every day, and went silent for a week. I was loyal when I picked up the pieces when her first semester drained her emotionally, and she wanted to quit. I was loyal when she said she needed time, space, money, trust. I gave it all, with no questions asked. But loyalty isn't submission. Loyalty isn't pretending your wife didn't publicly erase your name from her life, just to impress people who wouldn't stick around once the champagne ran out. That evening, Celeste herself sent a message. A long one. She tried to hit every emotional key: memory, love, regret, nostalgia. She even brought up our first apartment, how we used to sleep on a mattress on the floor, ordering takeout, and laughing over nothing. We had something real, she wrote. Can we please just talk? One last time. I just need you to remember who we were. I read it 3 times. I did remember who we were, but I also remembered who we became. There's a point where you can't return to before, not because you don't want to, but because the door doesn't exist anymore. It's been bricked over by choices, layered with silence, sealed by pride. And I had already stepped through another door. I looked around my apartment, bare in some corners, sure. Still quiet. But it felt mine again. The clutter was gone. The weight of her disapproval, the echo of her edited words, the way she used to adjust my collar or smooth down my sleeves like I needed fixing, it was all gone. I didn't miss it. I didn't miss her world of whispers and image, of networking parties where no one looked anyone in the eyes. I didn't miss being called her +1, or Caleb, he works with wires or something. I didn't miss pretending I belonged somewhere I was only ever tolerated. Loyalty must be mutual, and respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you give or lose. That week, I took my team to a networking expo. Not the flashy kind, just a gathering of trade professionals, electricians, architects, energy consultants, people with dust under their nails and quiet pride in their work. One of the organizers, a woman named Julia, introduced me before a small workshop panel. This is Caleb Monroe. His team wired our entire campus upgrade under budget and ahead of schedule. He's a quiet one, but let me tell you, his work speaks volumes. I shook a few hands, made some connections. By the end of the night, I had 2 new contracts and an offer to mentor at a local trade school. No one asked what car I drove. No one cared what brand my jacket was. They only cared if I showed up, if I delivered. And I did. That night, I sat on my balcony with a beer in hand and thought about what loyalty really meant. It wasn't about staying where you're hurt. It wasn't about holding on to a version of someone who only loves you when it's convenient. Loyalty is built where love is safe, where your name is spoken with pride, where you are seen even when you're not the loudest voice in the room. I hadn't changed. I had just stopped waiting for her to see me. And that, finally, was enough. A week after the guilt parade fizzled out, a letter arrived. Real paper. Stamped. Folded neatly. The handwriting on the envelope was elegant, old-fashioned, looping cursive, firm but graceful. The kind you don't see much anymore. Eleanor Monroe. Celeste's grandmother. She had always been different from the rest of them. While Marcia held her wine glass like a trophy and her sisters whispered judgment behind pursed smiles, Eleanor sat back and observed, quiet, sharp, impossible to fool. She was the only one in that family who ever called me son, without hesitation. The only one who ever looked me in the eyes like she saw a man, not a placeholder. I stood in my garage, hands still dusty from installing a new switchboard, and opened the letter with my thumb. It was a single page, handwritten. No preamble, no drama, just words like small stones laid gently but firmly on the ground. Caleb, I've heard the noise. You don't need to explain anything to me. I've known Celeste since the day she was born, and I've loved her since. But I've also seen the path she's chosen, and I won't insult your intelligence by pretending it was honorable. I remember the night you came to my porch in the rain, ring in your hand, asking for my blessing. You were soaked through, nervous, hands shaking. But your voice was steady. I knew then you were a man who loved with his whole heart. You still are. Let me be clear, Caleb. When someone chooses status over substance, let them go. You were never the embarrassment. You were the proof she wasn't ready to be real. Stand tall. I'm proud of you. Eleanor. I must have read it 10 times. It was the first time anyone said the words I hadn't known I was aching to hear. You were never the embarrassment, because that's what it had felt like, hadn't it? The way Celeste polished her online life until I didn't fit the filter. The way she smiled tighter when I showed up in jeans. The way her voice shifted, always, when she spoke to people who lived in L. A quiet reminder that not everyone was fooled by shiny things. That weekend, I drove to the old warehouse we were remodeling into a multi-use co-working space. One of my newer clients, an architect named Rafi, had asked me to help upgrade the entire electrical system. He said he'd heard about my crew through word of mouth, which meant people were talking. And not just about my marriage falling apart. They were talking about my work, my reliability, my growth. I walked through the site with Rafi and his team, clipboard in hand, giving instructions, sketching out modifications. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't checking my phone or wondering what else might drop in my inbox. I was present, whole. After the walkthrough, I sat in the front seat of my truck with the window cracked open. The air smelled like sawdust in winter. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled some notes. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. Just a single line. I saw the photos of the project downtown. You're doing amazing things. I stared at it. I could feel what she was trying to do. Reach for the version of me that still wanted her approval. The version that might pause at a compliment, even after everything. But that version was gone. Still, I typed back. Thank you. That was all. No hate. No emotion. Just acknowledgement. Civil, distant, and final. Later that night, I dropped by a small bar in Capitol Hill to catch up with my oldest friend, Marcus. He'd seen me through the first sparks of love with Celeste, and now he was watching me walk out of its smoke. Man, you're different, he said after our second round. Not in a bad way. Just clearer. I smiled. Feels like I took off a jacket that didn't fit anymore. He laughed and nodded. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? What now? Now that the letters had been sent, the calls silenced, the guilt drowned out, what came next? I build, I said simply. I start again. Not from scratch. From strength. I left the bar just after midnight, hands in my jacket pockets, heart calm. When I got home, I found a package waiting outside my door. No name on it. Just a black box tied with gold ribbon. I brought it inside, opened it carefully. Inside, a leather portfolio. Expensive. Immaculate. And a note tucked inside. You deserve to walk into every room with this in your hands, not behind someone else's. B. Eleanor. I ran my fingers along the stitching. It was the kind of gift that didn't ask for attention. The kind that spoke quietly but said everything. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, not to check my reflection, but to remember who I was. Not the version she edited. Not the shadow she tried to blur. Just me. A man who loved deeply. A man who gave fully. A man who had finally reclaimed his name. And I liked what I saw. The morning air in Seattle had that sharp edge again, clean, brisk, honest. I stood outside my new office space, keys in one hand and coffee in the other, staring at the faded sign above the door. Monroe Electric and Design, coming soon. The windows were still dusty from the last tenant, but behind the glass, everything was starting to come alive. Fresh wiring, new shelving, tools neatly mounted on the wall. 2 new work vans were parked out front, both with my company's new logo printed in bold, a lightning bolt running through the letter M, simple and strong. I had hired 3 apprentices in the past month, young guys with fire in their eyes and questions I loved answering. I walked through the entrance, flipping on the breakers myself. The lights buzzed for a moment, then bathed the space in clean, white light. This was mine, and not just the business, not just the tools, the piece too. I remember a time when everything I built pointed back to Celeste. When each invoice I sent, each late night spent measuring circuits, each contract signed, it all had one purpose: fund her dream. And I never resented that. Not then. Love makes you generous. It makes you see the future as shared. But now, every wire I connected, every blueprint I approved, every dollar I earned, it pointed to me. To something that couldn't be erased with a single caption or smile for the camera. It was the week before Christmas, and the city shimmered in light. Storefronts glowed with wreaths and gold garlands. Even the cranes hanging over construction sites were wrapped with strings of bulbs. I was finalizing permits at City Hall when I got a call from my supplier. My bulk order for winter projects had arrived 2 weeks early. I laughed out loud in the lobby. For once, something in life was ahead of schedule. As I was heading out the glass doors, a woman tapped my arm. "Excuse me, are you Caleb Monroe?" I turned. She wore a navy wool coat, her face kind, familiar in a distant sort of way. "Yes," I answered, cautious but polite. "I'm Susan from Latoile Design Studio. We're working on the renovation for that old shipping warehouse on Vine Street." I knew the one. Big contract. Private investor. I'd submitted a bid 2 months ago. "We'd like to bring you in," she said. "Your reputation in the city has changed. In the best way." That sentence stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Your reputation in the city has changed. It wasn't just about business. It was about me. I had once been the quiet man in the background. The one dismissed in tailored circles. The one introduced as a hobbyist or handyman, while others smiled politely and moved on. Now I was getting calls from those same circles. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I had become undeniable. Later that night, I stopped by the downtown project, one of our biggest contracts. My company's name was listed on a temporary billboard out front alongside the architect and builder. I stood there for a minute, wind pressing against my jacket, watching a crane lower a steel beam into place. The same hands that used to install ceiling fans in small apartments were now building infrastructure into a city skyline. No press releases, no parties, just presence. That's what real legacy is. Back at the office, I found my team packing up. Jamil, the youngest apprentice, waved at me. "Boss, you got mail." He handed me an envelope. No return address. But I knew the handwriting. Celeste. I opened it in the quiet of my office. The hum of the overhead lights the only sound. "Caleb, I walked by your project site downtown today. I stood across the street and watched your vans pull in. I saw your team. The precision, the respect in their eyes. And I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. You never needed to prove anything. You were always building something real. I thought I needed shine. But shine fades. What you built lasts. I missed the way you looked at me like I was already enough. I missed the way your silence said more than any compliment. I miss you." See, I read it. Once. Then I folded it and set it aside. Because while she might miss me, I no longer missed her. She had confused quiet strength with weakness, mistook humility for absence, tried to hide me behind curtains while building her fantasy in a glass house. And when the glass broke, I didn't run. I rebuilt. In the months since I canceled that tuition payment, I hadn't just erased a financial burden. I had peeled off a version of myself I had worn for too long. The agreeable husband, the invisible investor, the dependable backup singer in someone else's song. Not anymore. And as I looked at the space around me, bright, open, humming with new life, I didn't feel lonely. I felt grounded. I felt full. No longer a ghost in my own life. I had walked through heartbreak, silence, guilt, and shame, and come out stronger, smarter, and far more still. I had been disrespected. Then I became undeniable. And nothing feels better than building a life no one can take credit for but you. Christmas Eve arrived with a sky so clear it almost didn't feel like winter. Seattle had traded in its usual drizzle for a quiet stillness, the kind that hangs over the city when everyone retreats into warm homes filled with lights, music, and the scent of cinnamon or pine. I had no tree that year. No decorations, no stockings, no glass ornaments passed down from anyone. But I had peace. And that peace wrapped around me like a heavier, warmer gift than anything I'd ever unwrapped on a holiday morning. I was in my garage-turned office, finalizing some year-end estimates when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification, an email this time. The subject line was just 3 words. "I miss you." I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. Those 3 words were enough to tell me where it was going. Her voice, Celeste's, echoed in my head, not in the way it used to during quiet mornings or sleepy nights, but in fragments. Emotional pleas, half explanations. All the things people say when they finally realize what they broke wasn't just fragile, but irreplaceable. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath, the kind that clears the weight from your chest. I was no longer angry, no longer aching to be understood. What I felt now was a quiet certainty. I had made it through. Back in October, when she uninvited me to that Thanksgiving penthouse dinner and tried to make me disappear in the eyes of her elite circle, I'd been numb. But now I stood tall, not as someone who lost a wife, but as someone who found himself. I clicked the message open, not to respond, but to close a door that had been creaking in the wind too long. "I miss you. I know I don't deserve to say that. I know I said and did things that made you feel invisible. But please understand, I wasn't trying to erase you. I was trying to belong to a world that made me feel like less for loving someone like you. And I was wrong. They all left, Caleb. Mason? Gone the second he realized I didn't come for money. My friends? Silent the moment my image cracked. My mother can't look me in the eye. And even Tasha blocked me after I screamed at her for telling you the truth. You were my real life. And now I'm alone with a version of myself I can't stand. I'm sorry. I miss you. Merry Christmas." See, I sat with it for a moment. A part of me, maybe the part that once chased her through airports, that once worked extra shifts to wire her tuition money before deadlines, wanted to pick up the phone. Not to rekindle anything, but to say something kind. Something like, "I hope you're okay." But I didn't. Because I wasn't that man anymore. Not because I had hardened, but because I had healed. I clicked delete and watched her message vanish into digital ash. Then I stood up, walked outside, and locked the garage behind me. Snow had started to fall. Soft, slow, like nature was being gentle with me for once. I zipped up my coat, slid into my truck, and drove. Not toward a party, not toward a memory, but toward the downtown site. My team had finished the exterior lighting 2 days earlier, and I wanted to see it for myself. When I got there, the building stood like a monument in the dark. Clean lines, polished fixtures, warm, low lighting that made the steel structure glow from within. My company's name was etched into a small plaque near the door. Monroe Electric and Design. Lead contractor, Caleb Monroe. I stood in front of that plaque for a long time. Not because it was my name, but because I finally saw it the way others did. Without shame, without apology, just truth. I pulled out my phone, opened a camera, and snapped a photo. Not to post, not to brag, just to remember. Because this was the moment I finally loved myself more than I loved the illusion I tried so hard to protect. The illusion of a perfect marriage. The illusion of a wife who saw me. The illusion that what I gave would always be enough to keep her close. Now, I didn't need her closeness. I had my own. The closeness to my purpose. The closeness to my roots. The closeness to a future that didn't shrink to make space for someone else's approval. I drove home that night in silence, the snowfall turning heavier now, blanketing the roads like fresh linen. I parked, stepped inside, made a cup of cocoa with a pinch of cinnamon, and sat on the couch with a blanket over my knees. The place was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was mine. And in that stillness, I realized the full circle I had come. The man who once stood outside a penthouse door, heart in hand, wondering if he belonged, he no longer needed the door to open. He had built his own house, with his name on the title, with light in every room, with a future not borrowed, but owned. And as the snow painted the world white outside my window, I smiled. Not because I got revenge, not because I hurt her back, but because I finally walked away from someone who tried to shrink me and became too big to be forgotten.